Alright, folks. Welcome back, everyone. 皆さん、お帰りなさい。今日は228日目です。Right? It is day 228. Today is the day before our second lesson, our second sets of lessons from level 22. So it's going to be very quick. 15 reviews. When is it going to happen tomorrow? Looks like around 1 o'clock. Ooh. Maybe it'll be a break day and just lump these all together. Looks like 2 units, possibly 3 things. Alright, let's get right into it. Very, very short day. These are all probably going to be review. Nanichi. Okay. Nishi. These are burns. Oh, interesting. Taiteki. Yeah, some of the later ones need to be completed. What? Oh. Mitomeru. Okay. Kakunin. What? Wait, to test. How do I test something? Not that. Han, maybe? Hangai, right? Oh, yeah. Oh, Honan, right? Right. Hangaeru, ne? Kangaeru. Or... no, not to test. What? Hangaeru, to think? Oh yeah, to think about, to consider. Yes. What was it? It was like Conan or something. Or Kanga. Oh, Kanga. Right. Let's write something for this, for future burns. This is special. We're retroactively doing all this. Oh, Kanga. Kyoto. Ne? Oh no, I'm thinking of something else. Yeah, I'm thinking of something else. I'm thinking of Kyo. That was the problem. Oh, often thinks about conga lines. How to get people. Thinks about how to get people to form conga lines. Let me think about this. I feel like I want to add some edu to this. How do I edit this? What is e? We have some is. Put an e at the end. Okay. What?
Sticky.
Sticky. I don't know why I typed shoe. Atari?
当たり
Success. That's fine. Oh, comedy.
Hiniku.
Unique. Oh no, wait, not comedy. Irony or sarcasm. Just kidding. Oh, nanzen. Ah! I typed the same thing twice.
何千
Nanzen. Fine. This one, Kataki.
Kataki.
Okay. Oops.
無敵
Muteki. Muteki. Try writing Chinese.
Niku.
Okay, it's fine. Honto.
Hontou.
Fine.
自分
Even. Self is fine. Okay. Okay. Let's practice these before tomorrow. Tomorrow's our big lesson day. I often look forward to lessons, you know? Okay. Harmonics. Math. Cheap. Dollar. Saw. Allocate. Piece. Football. Ability. Dress. Icicle. Right? Or not dress, but clothing. Okay. Reads. Batsu. An. Ko. Datsu. Ka. Bo. Kaku. Hi. Ha. Se. Ji. Shi. Heck. um. Okay, we're gonna skip that for now. Call. Oh no, not call. Heck. Call. Fuji. Whoops. Fuji. Kaku. Fuku. Fuku. An. Chi. Kyu. Iki. Iki. Shi. O. E. Ga. Akira. So that. Alright. So. How did I screw this up? Oh, okay. Ryo. And. Different characters today. Different characters. Bamboo. Okay. Go back to our mnemonic. Bamboo. Tree and oh, Saku. All right. Yep, pretty sure for WaniKani, right? shortest day, good day to squeeze in something else. Alright folks, that's wrap for WaniKani today. Gonna watch this later. Arigatou gozaimasu. Right, as always, feel free to follow along, pick up WaniKani for yourself, give it a try. Always welcome for some banter, especially on short days. Short days, I've come with one or two, I actually come with one or two short stories. We'll put them in our back pocket to share something, right? To share something. Briefly, I was watching an interview. I watch a lot of interviews with multicultural people and multilingual channels as my spare time, right? On my spare time, looking at behavioral like interactions in cultural exchange moments. So because to give a sense of it, I don't believe that I have a hard time empathizing with people who like to learn language and like to delve into other cultures and embrace other cultures while also simultaneously creating double standards, right? So these channels help alleviate that. I love channels that continue to embrace cultural exchange, support cultural awareness, and especially lingual biases and cultural biases. So I was watching this, and YouTube obviously provides the algorithm. So it was the reverse this time. This time it was a Japanese interview process where they spoke mostly in Japanese, but they were talking about how to pronounce English words. So it was kind of lovely to see what Japanese people, or the interviewer was definitely bilingual, but the Japanese people, to see what they think are difficult English words. But when they're talking in Japanese and going through it, like, you know, chigai or chigaimasu, right? Or no, not chigaimasu. Like psycho, you know, psycho and stuff like that. You can hear the context in which you would say, "Oh, hey, is this right? Is this wrong? Are you close?" You know, kind of situation, and you can hear it and understand it. Obviously, I can't produce it still very much because I haven't really practiced that yet, but it was nice to see that the typical conversations regarding instructing, asking questions, and answering can be in the reverse. Some of the words that I wanted to share was scrumptious. Scrumptious was one of them. She sells seashells by the seashore. That was a little bit mean. It was like near the end. Squirrel. Squirrel was really mean. I was surprised by they had a older fella, like a middle-aged couple, and then a young couple or a young pair of friends, right? And that's kind of a nice blend. I think that one of the first words, one of the guys knocked it out. Drought. Drought is a great one. OUGHT. So it's fun to see them go through the same things that's happening in reverse. Like when I see drought, I see turoto, right? Turoto, which is what they said immediately. And then what was another? Vulnerable. Wuneburu. Wuneburu, you know, vulnerable, which is like the closest when they said it when the first one. And then vulnerable, and they had trouble like finding where the syllable emphasis was. So the vol and then the ball, right? And the ball and the vol are two different things, which was cool. That's really neat. The people were really, you know, they were having fun, they were smiling, and it was kind of nice. The comments in these channels are they're more celebratory, like, oh yeah, yeah, squirrel is kind of mean, and then, you know, then people chime in, well, these are kind of mean and these are kind of mean. So I really like that type of environment. I personally am very distant with people who do comparative analysis by putting one down and making it a competition kind of situation. Like, oh, well, Japanese is harder because, well, it's hard for everyone. Like, back and forth. The things you're learning are difficult, but it doesn't have to be unpleasant. Things can be difficult without being unpleasant, right? So that was a little bit of a share. Oh, there, Procro. I'm doing pretty well today. I am ending this segment and I'm going to take a break soon. So, all right, folks. There's my short story share for the day. Multiculturalism comes with a lot of friction. It comes with a lot of conflict of interest. But conflict of interest does not necessarily have to breed unpleasantness, bigotry, and discrimination, however trivial it is, right? If you behave like that, then it's not that big of a distinction between unintentionally behaving like that. So that's kind of why I wanted to share more multicultural stories. I absolutely love interviewing where they go back and forth between Japanese and English, where it might be Japanese centric, talk about English words, or English speakers talking about Japanese words, right? And with that, that's the convo you're having. It's bummer you missed it. Mixing culture is such an interesting topic. Yeah, we can talk more about it in a bit. I was sharing a story because WaniKani today is like 15 minutes long. I can share a little bit more. We got plenty of time today because I'm gonna be doing Phantom X in a bit. It was most of my time, right, Procol? Most of my time, I spend nearly 90% of my free time around, surrounding, and talking with people who are multicultural. In fact, it is very difficult to not think of, and we're not specifically only talking about nationalities, right? Because since we're talking about Japanese, well, it's fine. This is more appropriate in this. The context that I was using was Japanese and English speaking. There was the people do interviews. They either ask about Japanese culture or American culture. And one of my favorite formats right now, or formats that occur very often, are multilingual immigrants asking native Japanese people about either American culture or their culture. And they sometimes go 80-20, where 80% of it's in Japanese and 20% of it's in English, vice versa. And then there's also like podcast reviews, or they're more like interviews and not necessarily podcasts. Interviews where they talk to celebrities that bridge these. They're not necessarily celebrities in the sense of entertainment. They're more like representatives who create a cross-cultural exchange. Basically, like there was this one Japanese American, actually I think she's Hawaiian Japanese, and she talked about it's like a very different tone when you see interviews and conversations of people who live multiculturalism versus those who reject multiculturalism. You can be born into a multicultural family and still choose to reject, compartmentalize instead of embracing. So those two are very dynamic in interviews. And this one, they were talking about English words. They had a interview with a older fella, like a grandfather figure in Japan, and a middle-aged couple, heterosexual middle-aged couple, and then a pair of female friends, right, like high school friends. And they gave a few English words, and it was like drought, squirrel, scrumptious. I don't remember the others. And then they gave phrases like seashells by the seashore, right? And it was fun to see that because I have been learning Japanese for some time now and Chinese and whatnot, I read though I can see and feel how they're going about figuring out what the word means from a perspective that is entirely independent of English. So like when they were trying to get sound out dorato, right, dorato, and eventually get to drought, like 2 of the 3 groups were able to get enough of the drought. And then when the interviewer says the word, whether they get it or not, when they imitated it, it was really good. Like most of it was quite wonderful, and it just kind of gives me that semblance of feeling like, yeah, it's awesome. Like the one thing about these things is what these people are doing, this interview process demonstrate it's a rare thing. It's not a common thing. This is like the new age internet situation, and the interviewer doesn't strike me as someone who is native Japanese. So there's a thing that you have in like in that situation where apathy, when people are apathetic because they're monocultural, it doesn't mean they don't have fun or they can't enjoy genuinely being interested in another culture or in another language, you know, etc. Like the culture includes the language. So when they were talking, this interviewer had a really wonderful follow-up. They would say, oh, do you know what drought means? And then I think it was like kansatsu or something, kansetsu. I don't actually know how to say drought. So he was describing it. It's like, oh yeah, a long time no rain. That's what he described it as, to get drought. And then he followed up with a cultural exchange thing for empathy. He asked, what are your feelings about droughts? What would you want to say to people who are experiencing droughts? So those people, like the older gentleman, talked about in Japanese, right? In Japanese, they were speaking Japanese. Talked about, it's like, oh, my heart goes out to them. We don't typically experience drought in Japan. So make sure to drink a lot of water or conserve water, and also drink water, you know, like if his heart went out to them for people who don't have access to water. No water is really devastating, right? That's the kind of interview that I typically watch most of the time, and it's a great blend of, here's an exposure, here's a you talk about something that gets you in the mindset of thinking about people outside. And a lot of these interviews, when it comes to multiculturalism, is often raising awareness of outside. So like the interview with the Hawaiian Japanese person, she highlighted that it's great to see what other people outside of the world you live in do, because you can then have the choice to blend and integrate different perspectives. And she specifically talked about it in both ways. Like Japan can take a lot of inspiration or considerations from outside their world, much like the United States, right? And those type of things, it makes it very wholesome. Now, that is in contrast to sometimes a YouTube algorithm will spit one of those things out where people rage bait and or do competitions, deliberately raise divisive conflicts of interest in order to increase engagement. So then in contrast, those type of comment sections would be filled with toxic bigotry, right? Like general stereotypes. It would be typically marred by overtly negative one-sided arguments where it confirms all the bad things about the bad actors about a culture that they dislike and the good culture. And hear me out, you might be thinking they're deliberately malicious, but I truly think those people think that way. In fact, a lot of times people double down on the loudest voice despite being from that country. So things like, oh yeah, you're right, yeah, our country just really sucks because they do this, largely because the vast majority of people think that's the prevailing stereotype. So that's the type of thing that I say I'm apathetic to. And the stuff that I'm describing, it's actually, in my opinion, arguably rarer online. Multiculturalism is much more rare online than anything else. So it's kind of nice, right? Again, I'm sharing these stories, but they are in the minority. It's very popular, the people that make it work, but it holds a drop in the bucket compared to individuals who prefer controversy. Right. Like when someone says, "Oh, I love this sushi," which, and then it was revealed that it comes from the United States, then you have like a storm of commentary about people say, "Well, that's not real sushi. You should go to Japan and have real sushi. Thank you. You're welcome." Right? I'm like, but no one really asked, but how about liking both? Like, why do you have to put someone down? It's kind of like raining on people's parades constantly. When you have, to me, you can definitely tell that the vast majority of people who are multicultural, instead of drawing contrasting diminutives, like, you know, reducing the influence of one culture, it often seen as the world is big enough for two different takes, two different perspectives, more than one perspective, and you can love more. You can even love contrasting things, because when you look at it in a bigger picture, holistically, there is more to love like that. Hello there, Bree. Yeah, our day is just getting started, Bree. We're about to switch to Phantom X, and I'm sharing like a short story because WaniKani was a short session today. And Procall showed up right before you did, Bree. How are you doing? So the Japanese structure of language leads to them having a common pathway to reaching and understanding how to pronounce English words? I think so, honestly. So here's my thought about Japanese speakers randomly getting bamboozled, right? Very humorous approach where they are able to get out of their comfort zone. Like, I don't think approaching Japanese people in public to ask them to try to pronounce English words is like a comfortable thing, right? Not necessarily a very common thing. I would say it's just as hard. Like, my analogy for that is trying to go around New York City, and asking random English, like Americans, how to pronounce Japanese words. It's kind of like that, where you're this place, I think they were in Osaka. Osaka is a lot more like, according to pop culture, Osaka is a little bit more friendlier. But when you like run around in like Tokyo, it can be offset like New York City, which can be very tough. But those who do may give you the impression that they're very open. Now, hear me out. There is a selection factor to consider. Is there a chance that the Japanese people who are more likely to engage in these interview things are actually more worldly and open to it than Japanese people who chooses to ignore the call for solicitation, right? Like, for example, if I'm walking around New York City and someone comes up to me and say, "Hey, I want to do this, for YouTube, and can you, like, how much Japanese do you know?" If I said yes, I'm more likely than self-selecting myself into a position that may overrepresent the reality. I think it's one of the commentary that I was trying to make. I love that this stuff exists, and YouTube makes can convince you that it's a common thing because they'll keep feeding you all these things. But I was making a commentary in the sense that it would be awesome if these things are far more normalized, or maybe even balanced to the other side of things, where I think the vast majority of people like to make people bicker and fight against each other. Like, language learners fight more than they support, in my opinion. I would say over 50%, especially Japanese, quote unquote, serious Japanese language learners. It's kind of almost hypocritical by the nature of how one must be in order to embrace a life of being multilingual. Now, hear me out. I think there's a gigantic difference, to me personally, between someone who wants to be multilingual and someone who wants to speak another language. Those are two separate things. Someone who wants to speak another language removes themselves from the previous language that they do speak. They try to isolate everything to that and that culture. So when whatever target language they are, that culture will inevitably, habitually, and behaviorally be better than the current culture that they reside in. And they will continuously push forth a very myopic view. So that, to me, is exchanging one culture for another culture. You're displacing your culture because you believe the other culture that you want, the target language culture that you have, is far superior in many ways. So that is where I share apathy. I can appreciate that they're very passionate, and in order to be very passionate about it, you have to full send. So those are the full send people, the people who speak, talk, and live that. I don't. It sounds like I'm always constantly listening to Japanese and Chinese in the evening. It's because I listen to it alongside the United States, like American culture. The idea is that Japan and American culture interacts incredibly regularly, or it interacts sufficiently to be apparent online. In reality, it does not. Generally speaking, I think people think it is very, very normal, which is accurate. When you move to Japan, you'll probably very seldomly talk about American culture. And then it's the same with people who move elsewhere. Typically, those expats, right? Expats, when they move from another country, they're moving to a country that they desire and they want to live in. And it often comes with rejecting or being dissatisfied with the country that they emigrated from, right? From the other direction. And my parents, for example, they immigrated to the United States. They rarely ever gave that impression to me that they disliked what it was like to be in their heritage. So I grew up in a household where actually my parents still have more bias towards the culture that they actually live in, as opposed to the culture where they're from, because strongly monocultural nationalistic countries continue to imbue values. But since I exist, I guess, in the family, I tend to have a more celebratory nature towards the Chinese culture because my parents are celebratory towards the Chinese culture. But then I'm raised in the United States, so I'm also celebratory about the American culture. So when I think about, like, for example, sushi, right? Sushi is sushi in the United States. It is the internet and the people that regionalizes what sushi is, right? You can decide to call it American sushi, but American sushi doesn't exist in Japan. Well, sort of. In the same apparent, like, if we're not trying to create double standards, then when you call something American sushi, right? American sushi, then you would also say Japanese sushi. But if you think that you don't have to say Japanese sushi because that's redundant, that's like saying a language is redundant if they have the same words. So are you gonna go around and say loan words in Japanese is redundant because they originated from the like if they're British or English, right, of English origin? I think that's the type of double standard that I cannot empathize with. I can sympathize with how people want to think of it that way. I think the biggest talking point that is coming from a sense of pride and passion for those individuals. And I can sympathize with that because they want representation to be accurate, right? Like for myself, is there a part of me that want representation for Chinese Americans? Yes, but that is not to be weaponized against non-Japanese, like Chinese American, Indian American, Korean American. Like weaponizing is misappropriation, in my opinion, because weaponizing is often going to parallel misappropriation, like using someone as a victim where they don't think it's a victim to prove your case that it's bad or good. Like for example, it is bad to a monocultural person if someone called me Chinese, but to a multicultural person, often they would say, oh, I can understand some of the things, but be mindful, I didn't grow up in China, right? That's way different than, oh, this person's not Chinese, they weren't born in China. That's negative. That's monocultural. That's a monocultural perspective. You're excluding people as opposed to including people, right? So like when someone says, oh yeah, you're not speaking real Japanese because you're not from Japan and you're not born in Japan. Meanwhile, that same person wished that they were in Japan, being accepted as someone who's born in Japan and speak Japanese, which they don't. So what happens is they're using representation and misappropriating it to weaponize it. Like, oh man, I'm really, or for example, this is a little bit divisive here. It's like, oh, those are fat people, they must be foreigners. Who do you think would say that? That's the type of thing that is very, very unfortunate. Instead of seeking to spread the goodwill of your culture, like say your culture, we know the stereotypes now. Say the Japanese culture, oh yeah, Asians are always really thin. So instead of using it as a way, like what can we learn from them? Like what can we exchange? How can we like it be inspired? It's more like, no, you just can't because you're not Asian. Like you see, you're just doomed because your culture is doomed to fail as a whole. I'm like, you sure about that? Because the last time I checked, there are a lot of things about the culture that you cherry picked about all their bad qualities or undesirable qualities that exist in the culture that you enjoy, because they also learn how to extract and exchange things that they want, right? Like it's not a competition about putting down people that are undesirable. It's a competition in trying to better the betterment of everyone, right? And I think that strikes the big balance when I'm watching someone, at least in my opinion, when I'm watching interviews and content when it comes to language learning. The vast majority of the people that I watch content from have this glow and this positivity, and then their communities tend to be like 80 to 90% that, where it's like, hey, you know, I know squirrel really sucks as an English word, but hey, did you notice that French people also think that word, or like, you know, and so on. And what happens is you get 3 different nationalities celebrating, but also humorously participating in the idea that, yeah, sometimes natural languages just want to make you giggle about it. And what can you do? You can share a laugh together, as opposed to victimizing and making one an aggressor and making one a sucker, right? Yeah, there's a lot of that divisive rhetoric currently in the UK, mostly focusing on Arabs and Muslim culture. That's understandable. I witness that from time to time as well here. It didn't happen in Otakon, I can tell you that. There was wonderful. I've met several like groups of people who still they dress the part, right? They dress the part. So, and then, you know, I see their IDs and their passports. It was wonderful that they were also, guess what, enjoying anime in anime convention, and being like that same sparkle in eyes and stuff. So that's what makes multicultural interactions beautiful, in my opinion. It's a bit like that meme, thing bad, thing in Japan. Wow, yeah, basically. At the moment. Yeah, you're very proud and passionate about English culture and British culture, but a lot less so. But Britain is very multicultural, and I'm not blind to other cultures, and you appreciate a lot of aspects of other cultures that have mixed into British culture. Assuming someone to be a victim when they are not comes across as very demeaning to you, I find it can be demeaning because of how arrogant the person who's assuming like righteousness, the person who is assuming the indignation, right? The righteous indignation. It can also be misplaced. I think it's I know this is going to sound like doubling on the multicultural thing. I think it's missed opportunities. Someone who is incredibly passionate that have the tendency to demean others, possibly, or like speak for others while portraying, they have a passion, and it's to me it's disappointing that that passion is channeled in a manner that focuses on demonizing something they don't understand or find undesirable and apathetic towards, and then celebrating exclusively and double downing on the things they believe to be true, as opposed to like spreading that passion in a different way, where you promote the understanding of why this is the case, right? As opposed to brushing them off. Like, here's the difference, right? Someone could say, oh yeah, you know what? Let's understand why American sushi, right, caters to the palate of the region by understanding how the region treats, like, say, sugar, right, or salty things and whatnot. But instead, someone would say, well, that's because Americans make garbage food and they are like hop on and throwing back sugar like it's candy, right? And they are all fat and obese. That's different than raising awareness and making commentary on juxtaposition. That is hateful apathy, or maybe passionate apathy. I don't know how about that. Like, that's kind of like the same argument. You can do a reverse argument where, like, well, everyone speaks English. Why bother learning any other language? Because it's cool. It's awareness. You get to connect with other people. When you say something is different, not worth your time, demonize it, then yeah, you're more egotistical. You're gonna come off as more egotistical, ethnocentric, and less cultured. And you can, like, I'm not saying it's a bad or a good thing, you can gather with other people like that. However, there's a reality to this. People who are closed off and ethnocentric are more likely to care less about the things around them than people who are inclusive, right? So it's a balancing act that you must do. You can live happily in a bubble, certainly. I like to think the world is big enough for that, but that's coming from someone who's multicultural versus someone who's monocultural would suggest that certain cultures are not worth preserving because the best stuff is the only stuff that matters, right? And that's how you treat language. That's how they, at least in my opinion, how you can see it's imbued in most of their conversation and their comments. Like, oh yeah, I can never eat that because I know what's the best version of that. So yeah, that stuff definitely not worth it. Only spend your life, and those are fair logical arguments. Like, oh, you only live so long, you only have certain opportunities, you only have certain resources, so why not always go for the best that you think is the best, right? That's fair enough. And I'm not here to convince anyone to tell people that multiculturalism will make your life incredibly rich and worldly and stuff. Then no, that would be doing the same exact thing that I'm commenting on. No, you choose, and I'm sharing my perspective on it. I surround myself most of the time with content of people who are likely far more encouraging people tend to be people who are of more worldly values than not, because apathy is very, very strong. And when apathy may turn into unintended maliciousness, that's when you have discrimination and racism, right? You're far more proud of English culture than British culture. You'll have to share with me more of the details between like what is it about the English culture that is refiningly distinctive from the British culture. For myself, I jokingly say that I'm a Northeastern American person, but I absolutely love the South. I'm just saying, like, sometimes if it wasn't for certain facts like dying of heat stroke when I'm running outdoors, the South seems very appealing to me. The most South I've ever been in the United States, like wholeheartedly residing in and being associated with the culture, is Virginia, and that's like the northernmost southern representation. So and then ironically San Diego, but San Diego has something else. It's also Hispanic. There's Hispanic culture. So anyways, I just thought I'd share to embellish this a little bit more. As always, like I said, feel free, stop on by, share some commentary, some thoughts. I think to me, a very high indicative when it comes to language learning and stuff, a high indicator of someone who is multicultural versus someone who is monocultural, serial monocultural person, as in someone who wants to have the best combination of things versus someone who wants more combination of things. So I want to learn about Japanese. I want to learn about other cultures because I want all of it. I'm a greedy person. It sounds very selfish and hypocritical at the same time. I'm greedy for culture. I'm not I'm not an optimizing culture person. Multicultural people, in my opinion, have a wide enough heart to understand how those things are connected. Like, how does increased eating is connected with a culture that have maybe weight gain issues, and then how does that culture counteract that? In fact, most of the R&D in terms of science into healthy foods and like other innovations actually occur in a country that has those problems in the first place. So when you're trying to adopt new technologies and stuff, that comes with the challenges the culture face. Now, if you're thinking about why is this important? Well, in a country that people tend to celebrate, that have a lot of really healthy physical lifestyle, their mental health lifestyle is like arguably one of the worst. There are trade-offs, right? And it's not making a competition of who's having it worse. It's understanding how they're all connected. How is the culture of this possible? There are things that the culture behavior supports that are otherwise not part of the discussion, because monocultural people, in my opinion, choose to make it sound like they always make the best decision. Like, oh, I went here because it has the best of everything. You can't convince me otherwise. And I'm like, okay, that's your prerogative. But know that whatever you say is only part of the picture. The more prideful, the more selective you are, the less likely you'll understand the bigger picture of things, or even understand the nuances of even the smaller pictures, because you choose to be selective about it. Like, oh, all of American cuisine sucks, right? Like, well, how do you qualify American cuisine? It would be the same people who say all American cuisine sucks, and then they would say American cuisine doesn't have anything. Like, what I mean is, they would say like almost all of American cuisine is not American cuisine because it's inherited from something, and then they would make an argument at the same time that all American cuisine sucks. That's what I mean by the half glass full, only focus on negative affirmation. You just said that American cuisine is inherited from everywhere else. So how can you identify what is the suck? Where did the suck come from? In order to argue that, they would say all the things that were imbued by the American culture sucks. So then they lay claim, that's how divisive monocultural arguments would be. All the good properties will be ascribed and taken ownership, while excluding all the negative stuff, which is assumed to be ascribed to the culture they dislike. That's not how that works. Like, logically, emotionally, that's how that works because I'm describing the subjective emotion. Logistically and logically, that's not how that works, right? So iPhones, right? For example, iPhones. Oh, I had this conversation before with someone about Microsoft and software in general, and it was with someone from Europe. I'm not gonna be too identifying. They said that everything that made iPhones, like smartphone technology, like software, the software side, not the hardware side, was possible because all the good things came from their country prior. So then what they said was all the good things are actually belong to their country, and all the bad things are the reason why the United States suck at software design. Like, my only thought is, the fact is, those people making those things could be related to both. Like, there's no whether you exclude the thing. It's kind of like you meet someone and like, I only like the Japanese side of you. Can you get rid of the English side of you? Like, or you want to only see parts of the picture that you desire, and you only want to criticize the part of the picture that you hate, so that your decision is very clear. You only eat the best sushi because you have to rationalize that everything about any sushi outside of the Japan is not good. That's very different from saying, oh, I'm not very used to avocados on top of my sushi. That's more like a American thing. And that's cool because now you know that there's avocado in Americanized sushi. That's becoming more cultured and not saying that something doesn't belong on something. You know? The depth of history, the stages of development and culture, from Roman occupation to Anglo-Saxon to Norman. You really love the history of the monarchy and you really love the history of wars and battles. But that's a lot of those things also apply to British history. Those are the main reasons you love English culture. And Britain doesn't have as much depth, although the scale obviously goes to Britain due to the empire. As it peaks, it controls more surface area than the moon, I think, which is nuts. Yeah. See, that sounds like almost borderline what I'm talking about right now. I'm sorry if your message seems a bit detached from what you're saying, multitasking between listening you and listening to you. Yeah. See, what you just said is a double standard. They do, but it's mostly the depth of history of England that takes the cake for you because you only have a few hundred years. See, that's the double standard, right? You highlighted it, like that's what I'm illustrating here. You highlighted something that is incomparable, and that's your decision you make. Now I'm not saying you shouldn't be okay with this. This is your idea. For me, what I hear is quality A has this, and quality B does not have this, and therefore I like quality A. I'm like, well, in the few hundred years of the British Empire, they have a magnitude. They had a magnitude that has more depth than England alone. Like, you can make an argument of volume. So now you have to take time plus volume. You're talking about depth in terms of its time. But what about depth longitudinally, like laterally? Also, British culture means it includes the Scottish. Yeah, so that's what I mean by that. If you know what I mean. So it's a perspective, right? Like, for example, you can always you're arguing from origination and like legacy, and that's actually by coincidence what I was talking about yesterday too. Where if you think depth only comes with time, then I most definitely understand, I sympathize with the idea that you think something that lasts longer has more depth versus something that has a wider influence, right? So that's kind of like the argument that the United States always have. United States is a younger country. So whenever someone says, oh yeah, the depth and authenticity of history, it's like, but you haven't talked about how wide the influence is. If you have depth and long monocultural bias, it is the least cultured of something that is constantly interacting with other culture. Now, hear me out. Some people don't think that's depth. They think it's mucky. It nebulizes the culture. Like, for example, English is a language that does not have a lot of depth compared to Chinese, because one could argue that Chinese has been around longer. That is a setup for monoculturalism. That is a monoculturalism perspective, right? The multicultural perspective would probably lean, and it's not strictly counter, like it might actually seem like it's at the other end too, where which one has more influence? So the British Empire, in a shorter amount of time, nah, you can't bring in Chinese culture when it comes to death. That's unfair, unrivaled by far. Yeah, so that's why I can appreciate your perspective. I don't empathize with it though, because I understand the human condition, and I hope to even live for 100 years. Like, maybe, fingers crossed, I might witness 100 years. And I'm trying to think of creating value and decision based on things that you cannot change historically in order to favor them also means that you become less and less cultured over time, right? If you constantly value something that lasted longer, then that is all you're going to confine yourself to, which is something that a person can dedicate their life to. I am not fascinated necessarily by legacy alone. I'm far more fascinated by recency, right? So one could say there are two, you can make the argument for two things. A culture person could be someone who has a lot of depth of understanding of any particular long-standing aspect of something. Or a culture person is someone who understands a lot about the things with the breadth of it. So for me, I think multiculturalism typically favors breadth with depth as a secondary. A monocultural person favors depth with less breadth. So for me, when I can relate to a lot of people, is because I don't favor depth. I kind of sacrifice depth for breadth. So if you're, it's kind of, I'm going to draw like this way. So this, for example, a monocultural person would have a value system like this. A multicultural person would be represented by this. When you, I should shrink it a little bit so that the volume is comparable. So like maybe right here. So now we have breadth and depth. So on the surface, you will have more people to relate to, more different. This is diverse. Versus specialized, or what's the opposite of diverse? Focused. We're going to use focused. Or selective. Selective. And then the volume of these two things, the volume is our time, as in our mortality, right? Where we focus our resources, how much energy and time we have. The volume is the same. So the volume of A equals the volume of B, but one has more depth. One prioritizes depth, the other one prioritizes breadth, right? And it's between these two. These are fairly extreme examples. I would say I'm a little bit more wider. You could say I'm a bit more chunkier than I am taller. And then you're clearly Procol. You're strongly taller than you are wider. Provided wide is like, we're not talking about whether wide or being taller is desirable or not, but I'm farther this way than I am this way. Because you can learn a lot about this, but you don't cover a lot of perspectives. So when you make a comment, right, like here's like a problem solving. Problem solving comes with going back and forth. When you discover problems, when you discover things, the discovery process, right? When you discover something, the discovery process often favors breadth. And then when you go and solve difficult problems, it requires that then you focus in on the thing and get the depth you require in order to solve that problem. So they go back and forth. I don't know if people who tend to do this, if it's easier for them to, if they're able to do this every once in a while, right? The other way around sounds like another double standard, right? And I'm not sure if this is a human condition thing. What happens, in my opinion, from my experience, is you can choose more things to develop the depth. In this case, you can choose fewer things, but most of these fewer things have a lot of depth, relatively speaking, right? The whole idea of, like, people think of jack of all trades versus a specialist, right? Like generalist versus a specialist. And I think this is often due to the nature that we have limits in time and mortality, right? So you choose how to use your time. And understanding this means that those are the trade-offs. From my perspective, I don't see how the comments you made about depth of history, stages of development of culture, Roman occupation, etc., could even sway me to make a distinction between England and British culture, because my depth does not have the resolution to distinguish between them. If my depth requirement for my interest is this deep, then both England and Great Britain have equally interesting history and culture, right? Because I'm a foreigner. I'm someone who does not have the depth to distinguish. Like, if you think that Britain is this, and England's history is this is clearly greater no matter what, right? Because this has more volume, because the depth is harder. But you're in order to align our conversation, I would have to imagine that their breadth is less or is the same, which is not true to me. Great Britain's breadth is way wider than England. England has very low, like disproportionately less influence in recency. So the years are incongruous. That's the same argument that you're using, the same argument, in my opinion, that I must defend, because a lot of times people say the US doesn't matter because the US had less than 1,000 years of history. And yet we live in a world that it's very difficult not to draw comparisons to the United States, regardless if it's bad or good. Like, nearly most conversational standards deal with the United States. Now, you could make an argument, but what about the case of China? Because China has like super depth and is wide-reaching, right? I disagree. Because China actually wants to maintain that depth, so they keep to themselves. So this is actually shrinking relative to the United States. Isolationism is far more appropriate. They're contracting their influence. Right? Like the firewalls and censorship and whatnot. That's part of their culture. Japan, in my opinion, spend more time contracting. It is through foreigner interest that their influence is artificially inflated, or not artificially inflated, but naturally inflated by the interest of foreigners, not the other way around. And I think England is the same way. the pride and like the things that you're talking about, like the criticisms about their other cultures, right? Due to the pride and passionate this like the depths, it becomes harder and harder from a human condition standpoint to want to spend any time expanding because you have so much depth, right? If your history is incredibly rich, like the Chinese culture is incredibly rich, you can spend your entire lifetime exploring the Chinese culture without ever having to step out of and be interested in other people's cultures, right? So that's how I see England versus Britain. And the United States is really opposite of that because you have a 50-50 split even then. And of that 50, there are individuals who are so concerned about other things that they lack the time to develop depth in them, right? So then it comes to that point where that stereotype where you have the Americans being represented like, why do Americans just want to always be up in other people's business? Right? But they don't understand well enough to make commentary on that. That's because it's a representation, in my opinion, and a consequence of diversity. If you want to be diverse, you have less time in delving in the depth of things. If you become selective, you can become more well versed in the depth of very selective cultures at the exchange of your breadth. So these, in my opinion, this type of, I was trying to represent it with volumes and whatnot. This might not resonate with a lot of people. I usually use analogies like in culture or like habit formation or something. But this is something that is fundamental, in my opinion. It's the human condition, right? Our time is limited. Our volume, which is time, right? Our total amount of time, the volume, is limited. So how do you spend it? Do you spend being inclusive, multicultural? That means I'm neither really, really super Chinese, so I'm not real Chinese, and I'm not really, really American because I'm split between the two, right? That is spreading my volume like this. So whenever you're curious how I can tell or how I would interpret this in conversation is that I understand very well, in my opinion, humbly, trying to be as humble as possible. When people talk and favor things, when they make choices, their decision making reveals whether they are someone who specializes in something or specialized, prideful, potentially arrogant. You must also be agreeable to those people because they might have might have very stronger and selective opinions, right? Versus someone who is a generalist who may or may not want to go into great depths of things. They like to keep it more inclusive and dynamic and talk about various things as opposed to drilling the stuff. Like for communication, for me it's about the depth. So when someone tells me, oh yeah, how do you approach someone from a different culture? Boy howdy, do you have time? Do you have 6 hours to listen to me drone about the depth of interpersonal communication skills? If you don't, then that's understandable. Say hello and ask them how their how their days are. Maybe something you share in common, like the weather. And that would be a lack of depth, right? But the depth comes at a gain of casualness. And to me, that's what the perspective of someone who is cultured and intellectually more promiscuous sound like compared to someone who isn't. If someone who isn't would be very focused. It's like, oh yeah, I treat everyone the same. Like I try to be as friendly as possible by doing the following things. That is that person probably has a lot of experience with that approach. So they can make their communication style successful because they know all the drawbacks and the pros of their approach that they spent many years honing. Meanwhile, a different approach would be to gain as many perspectives as possible and participate enough sufficiently in those things to make yourself relatable. So my approach to intercommunication skills is opposite of a specialist who can talk circles around me when it comes to, I don't know, the nuances of pitch manipulation on people's behaviors, possibly. I don't know. I'm far more holistic than I am specialist. And that reflects my multicultural background as well. So it's very difficult to ever think that time means more importance of depth and value than the breadth. And the word, whenever I am referring to someone who's cultured, I'm not referring to someone who has a lot of depth. I'm more referring, like 80-20, more referring to how wide influential this person is. So there's influence where it's very strong and focused, and then there's influence where it's wide reaching, right? It also links into what you said quite a few streams ago about how certain approaches to socializing come across as someone seeming fake. Yes, exactly, right? When you have this problem, when you're using this, right, if you approach it from a breadth versus depth, fake, I love this topic too, the fake stuff. Fake, in my opinion, for someone, for anyone, is a arbitrary threshold that appears that this person is concordant, as in like consistent with a depth of standards. So what do I mean by this? So this line, if it's below this line, it's fake. If it's above this line, it's real. And oftentimes these are related to something. This is the depth threshold. And why does this have to relate to also fake in the idea that you have lots of masks, right? Lots of masks. Now, when you talk to someone, right, like a stranger, right? If a stranger's depth requirement is this, then it can appear genuine. Also, if the requirement is this high, right, it will likely not appear genuine or fake because there's a lack of depth. And when there's a lack of depth, like when someone perceives a lack of depth, like it didn't cross this threshold, they will then pay attention to all the things that are not relevant to them. And that is what they would consider as extraneous masks. So let me, that it's a little bit befuddled. This like analogy is incomplete. I'm still working on this. So when you think about someone who is really interested in depth, all the things about another person's characteristics, the other stuff, if they are greater and very noticeable, then these things are fake. They add to the fake meter. So for example, if I am American and I say I am American and I start doing things that do not belong to the depth standards of being an American to a stranger, then I am faking everything else. Like everything else is irrelevant. So like, oh, you're not American because you're Chinese, right? That's kind of how that works. A lot of time, not. This is a different way to describe what's going on. So you can view this in different ways, but this is how I view it. When someone needs a specific amount of depth, you are only real when you surpass that depth of understanding. You are only a serious language learner if you have met the qualities, the depth of the qualities of the person who you're talking to, right? You are not a serious, you're a casual, a filthy casual, or even a fake if the stuff that they only see is the things that are relevant. So how do I bridge this? I understand this about myself. I know that there are many things that I like, that I devote my time to, that will not be relevant immediately to another person who has certain interest. So what I can do is I can take these things that they don't see or don't like to see or don't care about and reframe it into how it connects to the things they do see. So when someone says they only care about Japanese when I'm on WaniKani, right? They won't need to see or never care about that I spend just as much time learning Chinese, right? So what happens is this will make me more of a casual or a fake Japanese language learner because I didn't dedicate all of my time, like exclusively to Japanese. Now, I understand that is the shortcoming of, or like it can be seen as a shortcoming to people who are only interested in Japanese. So what can I do? I can take Chinese and make it relevant to Japanese. I can explain how the time I spend in Chinese is relevant to my Japanese interests. Like I like Chinese because Hanzi is like kanji and that they support each other. So then eventually, instead of people seeing only half of the time that I spend, they can start to appreciate some, like a little bit more of how it is connected to the Chinese. And I'm only doing it in the other direction because most of the time that's the direction I'm going. Now there is another way. When someone tells me, so what is a reverse situation? This is someone who thinks they're good at communication, right? And oftentimes when a stranger says they're really good at communication, I sometimes only see half of what they're saying, right? Because that half belongs to my cylinder, because I believe that I specialize in communication. So I have a lot of depth in communication, but I don't see the rest of their value. So what I do then to keep myself educated is I ask, what is it that I don't see? And that's how I form my questions. So when someone says, oh, I absolutely love this, I love this communication style. You start by telling people they're buttheads. And then you get their attention and you're like, psych, just kidding. You're really cool. Like, and then if I don't see that, like if I am so caught up in my way of thinking about communication, effective communication skills, and they share with me something in here that relates both our communication skills, but then they say something else that I don't understand, in order to better appreciate what they have, I need to incorporate the rest of them. So the goal is always, in my opinion, to try to see the person for what they are, like more of what they are, and bring them into the conversation with more of themselves, not with less. So going in the reverse direction is the same too, where if I'm in the position where I can't appreciate what's like only the stuff that's relevant to me, I gotta remind myself that, well, I might not see the whole thing. This person might be great at communication. They just happen to be using different techniques from different places. Now, it might not always be true, but I prefer to operate this way so that in either if I'm this person or I'm this person, I'm trying to see more of the culture this person has, which is more so I'm more talking about their behavior, right? Their normalized behavior and thinking. So that's pretty much a way to summarize a little bit of it. I spend more time doing this than anything else, really. Also, you recently got a new job which has you doing 10.5-hour shifts, so you're pretty tired. Just so you know, I might not be on top. That's perfectly all right. You shouldn't be, you don't have to be like over pushing yourself for sure. The lack of depth was often shown from members of the popular group back in the school and how they interact with people from your experience. Yes. So popular groups, right? Popular groups. How do they become popular? They have to have a lot of surface area. That surface area is the type of people. And how do they stay popular? They create just enough depth, just enough to appear like they know enough about a lot of things. That's popularity. You know, the holistic approach. Meanwhile, the specialists, the people who belong in this group, will absolutely love and worship them. But anyone outside will likely either dislike or strongly agnostic. Right? Because it doesn't include them. Right? A specialist, you will be the messiah to those, you know, you will be the worshipped person, the expert, if you will, to anyone who is in this position, which has a smaller surface area. There are less targets. So oftentimes specialists and experts are less popular. In fact, almost greater than 90%, the specialist is less popular. That's what the word niche comes in, right? For the French able people. That's what niche is. That's what hardcore is. And then popularity is where casual is. And sure enough, I kind of represent what I am, right? What is casual? It's also often multicultural. Your attention is divided. It's divided among more things. And then monocultural. And I think, in my opinion, because of how the internet celebrates things, it's strongly monocultural right now. Like, the tendencies are favorable. The society online is favorable towards monocultural perspectives. Monocultural perspectives support divisive contrasts and comparisons. Right? It's us and them. If you're not specialized in this, then you're subpar, right? If you don't understand something as well as I do, then you're irrelevant. If I'm this good, you have to be at least this good in order to hang with me. Like, if I can appreciate sushi this much, you have to appreciate sushi just as much as I do in order for me to treat you with mutual respect. That's this. Meanwhile, many of the influencers, the most successful influencers that, or arguably more successful business influencers, those that have like much more quote unquote influence, are broader people, broader influence. So then you get in like, they're not particularly good at any particular thing, but they're good enough. So in this case, you always have good enough, sufficiency, versus min-max. Min-max and potential. All of this is important to me when I talk to someone. So when I ask questions and when they share comments, right away you can make this separation, because the internet is really good at this. This is less than 10% of people I've ever met online, and this is greater than 90% of people that I've met online. How right away, what is a great red flag, or what's a great flag? I don't want to use red or green or flag. They're just indicators. What's a great indicator? The moment someone drops the word best, you're already in this group. And then the goal is to see what else the person says in order to see how wide the group is. Because when someone says, oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread, you ask them, what are the sliced breads? If the sliced breads include a lot of type of breads, then it's someone who is best, but also have some inclusion, right? So like, here's one. When someone says, this is the best thing I've ever done, best thing ever, and their sample size is 1. Well, yes, it is the best because it's the only thing you did. So whenever someone hits this right on the mark, I ask them, out of how many? Not like literally out of how many, but I want to ask like, oh, what does that include? Right? What does that include? Then you can test the breadth of their knowledge and experience versus the depth of their knowledge. When someone comes up to me and say, oh, I've been doing this job for 15 years, I'm like, man, can I pick your brain about the depth of your knowledge? But I'm also curious, how inclusive is your experience? Can you describe your experience and how much you have applied to it? Because I would love to extract the most information. So if I'm talking to someone who has a lot of depth, I got to extract this. This is the value of the person. I have to go deeper, or I have to know how to ask questions to go deeper, right? If someone strikes me as someone who's more wide open, I start relating things. Like, for example, if someone suddenly says, oh, my favorite anime, my top anime, like my top anime is, and then instead of naming like one thing or maybe 1 to 3 things, this person started talking about like 50 different things and genre as a whole, then I know who I'm talking to. Then I start talking about genres, and I talk at the level that they are most appropriate. Like, oh, they like sci-fi, okay. Then we start bringing in all the sci-fis. Hey, you know, a romantic sci-fi movie would be Her. If you like Her, maybe with a different spin, there's Arrival. Arrival talks about linguistics, right? Or the fun thing about linguistics when communication between aliens. But if you're really into action-packed sci-fi, maybe something like Dune, which kind of has that world-building stuff. So that's what you would do if someone has a breadth of interest. Popular. So pop culture helps a lot with that, right? So when someone says, oh, I like mainstream stuff, we gotta go with popular. So I dabble in One Piece, My Hero Academia, Solo Leveling, things like that. And then if they're like top anime, like a really top anime, it's probably going to be something like Monster. Whoops. Or maybe like One Piece but only One Piece. Like One Piece everything. So how do you I like using this example because I have plenty of these. When someone says I read all manga, watched all of the TV episodes of something, we're talking about depth. We have to go in depth. So what I usually typically say is if I can think of something that's very nuanced, like, have you noticed that this obscure thing, maybe as obscure as I can figure? If not, I would just ask a question. Like, can you tell me something that you believe not everyone knows, or someone like me who's part of the popular group may not know? Like, tell me a fun trivia that you would use as an icebreaker to demonstrate that you're really, really invested in this one thing. And that's kind of why I would ask you, Procol. I would probably ask you about English things. We already talked about it to some extent because of the shows, right? Like Vinland Saga. I would ask probably something, if you've seen Vinland Saga, or should perhaps try to watch Vinland Saga, because right now I am this when it comes to anime, and you are possibly just this right now from my perspective, but you're actually spending your time doing something else. So I don't know what this is, but I know for a fact that this is probably, your anime depth is less than mine, right? Because you have other things that are interesting. But you did mention you are into English culture. And the thing about Vinland Saga is it's about English culture. So I can bring whatever I don't know about you into this. Meanwhile, your English depth looks like this, and my English depth looks like this. But you don't know what this is yet. Which technically, if we wanted to be really accurate, your English depth is probably this. And my anime depth is this. But what happens is we don't see this. This is a question mark. So that's where the questions come in. And then at some point, what happens is if you ask and do this, it will feel like you are still talking with depth and breadth. And that forms human connection. So rarely will I ever try to not bring something in and learning from someone. But yeah, I kid you not, whenever I meet up with my friends, I want to learn something from them. They have, like, my connections with my friend is every waking, like often, most waking minutes, because I don't see my friends very often nowadays. Most waking moments, I leave having learned something that I didn't know about them. And I hope that I give them as well, give them something that they otherwise didn't know because of the time apart, right? And that's also most connections with language learning and whatnot. If a stranger comes to me, yesterday is a good example. Lucky Day stopped by, and Lucky Day is using Hanzi Hero, right? And Lucky Day told me that they finally got 300 items done. That's because the last time we talked, Lucky Day also told me how much they did or they started, and I asked them, oh, so how far are you? Like, what have you done? What do you focus on? And then now, like a week forward, they told me that they had 300 items, and I asked them before, like I will ask them every time, so what kind of, what word or vocabulary or element that sticks out in your head? He told, Lucky Day said, kaishu. Kaishu is to start. and Lucky, he wrote the Lucky Day wrote out 开始 in Mandarin or in Chinese. I think it's both the same and simplified and traditional. And that person asked me, "Do you know what it means?" And I'm like, "Yes, I do know what it means. It means to start." Or no, actually, 打开 was the word, not 开始. 开始 was start. 打开, which is to take out or to open. And then they're like, "Yes, it's true. Like, yes, that's correct. It's open." It doesn't matter if I already know whether it's open or not, like, because what I already know is not as interesting. I wanted to know what that person knew and get that person to share with me something they learned. So that to me is what happens when someone has depth, right? And still cares about the question mark of other people. This is teaching and coaching 101 to me. And this is influence. Or some people would call it agreeability. It rarely matters. It still matters, but it matters secondarily if someone can't meet my depth. Because my depth is only as wide applicably. So you can have a lot of knowledge about something, but when you talk to someone and it's not within their scope, you can sound like a condescending person or an apathetic person or prideful person or just someone who's disinterested, or apathetic is the word I would use, right? And these things mean that oftentimes you become less cultured to this person, not to yourself. You are still cultured to yourself, and you remain cultured to the people who are in this circle, in this volume. In fact, so much so that these people in your circle would think that the people outside are uncultured. And that's the relative scape of things, right? And I use these volumes, but you can replace it with anything else. Like, say your love of Pokemon is one. I don't know if you like Pokemon. If I had to say Pokemon, I'm like this. And I think if I had to pave the landscape of the people that self-selects me, like interacts with me, their Pokemon thing is like this. I think the average person is far greater than me. Now, the thing is, I don't need to only know about Pokemon. I can bring in Japanese. And you know what? Nah, we need to match this guy, right? This is a threshold that you have to match. So how do you stack on top to make your depth get deeper, right? Oh yeah, let's add Chinese too. And how does Chinese relate to Japanese, which is relating to Pokemon? And then now we've crossed a adequate threshold where it can seem like you have something interesting to say despite not having the depth necessary to meet Pokemon specifically. I could give an example. Bree, I don't know if Bree is still here, but we could start with Bree has this gigantic cylinder, and it's made of like anything you can think of, from Law and Order to, like, I don't know, anything dealing with like episodic like crime TV shows, right? It is so deep compared to me. Like I do not, I separate. I'm very I'm very fat on this, right? So what I can do is I can take a chunk of this, which ended up being the mentalist, and I can try to grow vertically. But meanwhile, all this other stuff, I gotta find a way to connect it to this, which is connected to her interest, right? And what I can do is then we talk about other things that are tangentially related, and maybe we can share something. Currently, I definitely will probably start watching Humans again. But then I mentioned like the Americans. So despite not being wholeheartedly enthusiastic about it, we also had The Diplomat. And this was actually relatively new to her, while it's also new to me. So then we start building things together. That's that's one way to represent human interaction, I suppose. Okay, all right. That's enough for our the digression. I would think to wrap it up and to bring it back to like language learning, right? To language learning and culture. I like watching content that interacts with this. It's generally the interviewer tends to have the person that interviews tend to have a pretty decent depth. There's usually time for I think the interviewer. So to bring this analogy back to the beginning of my story or my anecdote, the interviewer tends to only operate with just enough depth. And what they do is they select for people within their range, their breadth, right? Their breadth. And when they converse, their targets will have any amount of depth. And usually when it comes like language, it's usually fairly surface deep. But what happens is an effective person who may seem diverse or multicultural, their breadth tends to bring in the stranger. So if a stranger is like this, when it comes to, right, in Japan, I believe most of the people are very monocultural. So despite having this, right, they have a lot of other things they can comment on. There's a lot of invisible things that are not available, right? So what the interviewer does is they decide to follow up with questions that allow the person, whoever they are, to share some of that and add to the content. And I absolutely love it. That's the content that I typically look for. I stray away from content that does only confirm. It only confirms things. It rarely ever says what it is not and what is not there, or share an open platform. Like, hey, do you like, for example, do you know the correct answer? The correct answer, right? And then they'll be like, no, that's wrong. Bye. Looks like they're stupid and ignorant. That's not the type of content that I enjoy. Or something like I like method A. No other method is important. And if they're asked about other methods, they will only tell you what it is not versus what it is plus what it is not. And how does that look? I'll give you a hot take. This works. That doesn't. Trust me. And then when you ask them examples, they're like, this has these things, that doesn't. It's still that doesn't. So that person gives you examples of the thing that they have depth in, but it can be very obvious that their breath does not include the thing they dislike, and to what extent. And that's where I either leave because I don't believe they have enough breadth to include my interest, right? That's the main goal. If you're looking for information, you hope that the breadth of their knowledge includes yours with sufficient depth for you to learn something. So you have to first figure out if they have the breadth of knowledge relevant to you. In my opinion, I don't think it's the other way around. Sometimes you can gamble. You can say someone who has a lot of depth might naturally have enough breadth in the topic to include you. That's how, in my opinion, how the algorithm works. That's how the YouTube algorithm works. For now, it's changing. The way YouTube normalizes behavior and information discovery is changing now, because kids, in my opinion, children are affected by this. If they are constantly focused on depth, then they aren't going to develop enough skills to participate in critical thinking and problem solving skills. Critical thinking and problem solving skills requires breadth of knowledge. They do not, depth may make you very, very excellent at solving very specific problems in critical thinking. It might even be so selective that you don't have to solve anything, because as long as the algorithm serves you the depth required, you're no longer needing to solve anything. Your problems and stuff are so narrow that everything else, if it's a problem you can't solve, you just avoid it. Just ignore it, right? Or it doesn't exist. Like, for example, learning a language deals with social skills. Using a language deals with social skills. But since the algorithm can convince you that its input only is sufficient, then yeah, you can spend the whole time getting a lot of depth into the language that you are learning, but you lack the breadth of social skills to make yourself sound natural, despite knowing what natural sounds like, right? That's where children comes in. So now the algorithm is kind of doing, YouTube is kind of fiddling with it. Now there's like discovery. Most of the algorithms have some sort of discovery, contrasting information. AI, machine learning, is trying to incorporate that through summary and paraphrasing. But because, in my opinion, the internet has normalized depth over breadth, the moment AI becomes more convenient, then the algorithm, that becomes the only sole source of information. So then these people will have a lot of depth in understanding how AI gives you information versus how another human being gives you information. And then what happens is different human beings are spurious. AI is not. It's incredibly consistent. If you develop consistency, you have a lot of depth to optimize. The algorithm will always behave as the algorithm behaves, so you can get to min-maxing it very, very quickly. That's good for business, by the way, and also good for objective thinking, right? If something behaves ever so consistently, what is the most critical part about the AI is whenever it behaves inconsistently, and that's what it's being criticized for. But my only thought is, man, imagine being angry at AI for being inconsistent because it's built on human databases, and then you start thinking, to like, from my perspective, you interact with a human, how consistent do you think information from humans are compared to AI? And then that machine learning, right? That machine learning is built on human samples. So it's poetic to me that hallucination is seen as an anomaly rather than a social norm. because it's built on human databases. Now, maybe that will become a thing of the past in the future, where there's like this super consistent data-driven stuff. But despite being data-driven when it comes to humans, it's still spurious as well, right? It'll be interesting what that happens in the future. But this, in my opinion, is what makes language learning exciting for me. So I'll bring it back to language learning. It's super exciting. Gaming is exciting this way. Like all this interaction between the idea of multiculturalism, education, right? Education is the foundation. What I'm thinking of is curiosity, people's interest. All of that underlies it. So I'm still addressing, it all comes back to like habit formation, critical thinking, and problem solving skills. But this type of perspective may be interesting to some people. Like, how can you visualize how deep to go, or how wide you have to go? It's kind of like one of those things, like if your target is this big, right, then you got to know how big your target is. That's how deep you want to go, in my opinion. But if your target is this wide, you can go anywhere. You don't have to go deep. There's a big surface area. But hear me out. But then we add a new dimension. If the target is this wide, how deep do you have to penetrate? If the target is this wide, it could be this long. So how... Oh, okay, now we're getting into a little bit suspicious analog, but that's kind of how I imagine conversation, or practicing conversation. I try to match. Obviously, you don't have to think about any of this stuff. Sometimes people just feel these out. You know, you vibe along. Vibing, by the way, vibing is breath most of the time. Serious, hardcore, it's depth, right? And I guess in this way, what I just discussed was this concept in depth versus, you know, making it palatable. Maybe in the future I'll create something that is only 10 minutes long and is a little bit more TLDR. All right, folks. There you have it. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about other things, Proca. I don't know if Bree is okay. But we have to talk about more. I think Vinland Saga. I would love to hear what you think of Vinland Saga, Proca. In the context of English history, because Vinland Saga, the anime, is cursorily a really great gold standard in terms of other things like animation, storytelling, and whatnot. But the context of this is they're talking about Nordic English, Britannia stuff is the backdrop. It is a drama though, so it's not like a world building thing, but more so a drama. Anyways, just thought I throw that out there. All right, folks, that's a wrap. This was a great example, a great opportunity to explain what I mean by you're always welcome to stop on by, you know, share some thoughts, ask some questions, exchange some ideas, share anecdotes. I think I understand this is a public space, so we can exercise some discretion. However, exercising discretion in a public space doesn't have to be an unsafe place, right? To try to bring people in or exclude people, I suppose. If that's your thing, I would love to hear it, right? I think life is too short to constantly spend time rejecting other people. So you're more than welcome. This was a great example a first-hand example of what I mean by feel free, stop on by, share something, we'll digress together. All right, folks, that's a wrap for WaniKani today. If you're only interested in WaniKani or cultural exchange or language, right? 皆さんまたね, right? 見てくれてありがとう. I'll see you guys next time. And thanks for watching. I'm gonna get up, stretch, walk around, and I'll be back for Phantom X. Thank you, thank you.